apparently the guy was head executive, said, sell it, it's a piece of nothing. Now this was a moment when, this was after the George Reeve and
Right,
all that.
right, yeah.
It was a bad moment for the comics. It wasn't very hot. But he said, sell it, it's worth nothing.
In Cleveland, Ohio, during 1933, a high school student named Jerry Segal came up with the idea of a Superman defending America amidst the Great Depression. With the help of his friend and illustrator, Joe Shuster, Superman was realized for the first time. Within 2 years, the boys worked at DC Comics, and the rest is history. Superman went through many evolutions. There was a radio program in 1940, which happened 3 times a week.
Presenting the transcription feature, Superman.
Look, up in the sky.
It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman. Yes, it's Superman, strange visitor from the planet Krypton, who came to Earth with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men.
Then there were cartoons in 1941, followed by novels in 1942. In 1948, Columbia Studios made a 15-minute film called Superman and followed it up with another film called Atom Man vs. Superman. Both starred Kirk Alyn as Superman and Noel Neill as Lois Lane. With popularity, the studio made another film called Superman and the Mole Men, now with George Reeves playing Superman and Phyllis Coates as Lois Lane.
Who are you to tell us what to do? All I'm telling you is that little creature in there has as much right to live as you do.
In 1951, television was becoming a big thing, and RKO made an Adventures of Superman television series, once again starring George Reeves and Phyllis Coates. As the years went on, Superman just grew in popularity. Affordable comics were the norm, and it was focused directly towards kids. More merchandise appeared as a result. There was even a Broadway musical in 1966. Superman became part of an American mythos as he fought Nazis in World War II and would go on to fight for truth, justice, and the American way. In a time when you can believe in such things without any cynicism, Superman was all about patriotism and doing the right thing. He was an example for kids to follow, and kids loved him for it, whether boy or girl, because in that time they introduced characters for all kids, ranging from Superboy, Krypto the Superdog, and Supergirl. Even though Superman was positive and patriotic during the late 60s and early 70s, America was not. The hippie movement and young culture railed against the establishment over the Vietnam War, and America was divided. A comic about patriotism was less desirable, and during the early 70s, Superman was not in the best place. Even the creators of the comic, Jerry Segal and Joe Shuster, were trying to regain the rights to control Superman, but were pushed out of DC Comics in 1966. During the early 70s, Jerry struggled to get by as a typist in Los Angeles, not making much. It seemed Superman was a weak brand, but that would change shortly. In the 1970s, a name growing big in Hollywood was Alexander Salkind. Salkind spoke 6 different languages, had a dislike for airplanes, and a fear of cats. Salkind was also great when it came to talking people into investing money in his enterprises, and he was known to find a way to save money anywhere he could with filmmaking. During 1974, he was making a big wave with his 2 Three Musketeer films. After filming way too much for Three Musketeers, Salkind came to the conclusion that if he used the extra footage to make a second film, he could save big money on a sequel, and in the long run, he would pay actors less for 2 movies, and he could rush everything along, getting more bang for his buck. This would make a huge stink in Hollywood, as the Screen Actors Guild of America created what would be known as the Salkind Clause, which guaranteed that actors' contracts for one film could not extend to another film without the actor's consent. What happened with the Three Musketeer films is very important because this would have long-lasting effects on the 1978 Superman, which you will soon see. The director of the Three Musketeers was Richard Lester, and remember that name because he will be returning when we will talk about Superman and his sequels later. Nevertheless, the Musketeer film was released and it was a success. While the film was out, Salkind's son and producing partner, Ilya Salkind, thought of an idea of making Superman during the fall of 1973. He went to Alexander in Cannes with the idea, and Alexander's response was, "What's Superman?" Since Alexander didn't know what Superman was, he listened to his enthusiastic son. He refrained from saying yes or no to the project. Rather, he waited for his other producer partner, Pierre Spengler, to weigh in. So Ilya pitched the idea to Spengler, and this was his response to the idea. "It's terrible. I was very skeptical how to do it, how to approach it. Of course, we realized the enormous camp potential of the story, and playing up the campiness was one possible approach, but then you would never be able to sustain the story for many years. And by this time, we were already considering sequels." This quote was another important and ironic statement because Spengler was already warning about campiness, and later sequels to Superman would be infested with this, and it would ruin the franchise with Christopher Reeve later. We will go more into this whenever we start to cover Superman 2 in the future. Salkind then tested the idea with investors in Europe, and surprisingly, everyone knew what Superman was and was on board, so Salkind greenlit the project. Right from the start, sequels were apart, and Superman 1 and 2 would be filmed at the same time, kind of like what he did with the Three Musketeers. So negotiations began with National Periodical Publications, which was owned by Warner Communications, around August and September 1974. What was not known by the Salkinds was that the original creators of the character were fighting in courts, losing all their money, trying to get the rights back. But Warner Brothers acted quickly and paid the original creators $20,000 a year if they dropped their claim on the character. They did this because they wanted to secure a deal to sell the rights, which they intended to demand millions for. So $20,000 a year for each was a small price to pay for a rich studio. Anyways, the meeting lasted 3 to 4 days, and it was clear DC demanded that the filmmakers be faithful to the legend of Superman, and casting was important to the owners of the IP. Things seemed good, and so they sent Pierre to New York to finalize a contract, but it took a lot longer to mash out the details. Pierre would stay for 6 weeks, negotiating 10 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week, and at the end, the contract was 70 pages thick. In the agreement, those owning the IP had veto power over casting, the writer, the final script, and how Superman was portrayed, along with other various details. The rights were sold for $3 million, lasting 25 years, according to Ilya Salkind. For the first screenwriter, William Goldman, who wrote the novel for The Princess Bride, was approached. Goldman recently won an Academy Award for his Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid script, and he just finished another screenplay for Robert Redford called All the President's Men. Goldman was interested in Superman, but lacked the confidence over how to approach the material, so he passed. Then the Salkinds turned to legend Mario Puzo, who was responsible for the Godfather movies. He was offered a handsome deal, and Puzo accepted. The deal was Puzo would deliver a first draft before the summer of 1975. This way, production for the film could begin in November 1975. The first draft would be ready early in April 1975, and it was huge. over 300 pages long, and it needed to be whittled down. By October 1975, a final second draft arrived, and Puzo was worn out on the project. After the producers examined the bulky screenplay, Puzo suggested they get other writers to rewrite his material before he left the project. The script we are going to cover is the first draft with some added pages dated July 8, 1975. It is vastly different than what we got in the final film, and this is that script. We begin with credits, and a spacecraft is traveling from Krypton to Earth as the planet is destroyed behind the ship. At the end of the credits, Earth would be center screen, with Superman on one side and four supervillains consisting of General Zod, Professor Vaycox, Jax and Crew L staring back on the other side of the planet, foreshadowing the duel to come. When the movie starts proper, we focus on Jor-El, trying to convince the Council of Krypton to build ships and flee the destruction about to befall their planet. They do not accept his findings. Jor-El submits to their ruling, but asks as a precautionary measure that ships be built, and silently a lottery with citizens occur to at least evacuate a small number of people where they can be taken to Earth in the event that his findings are true. He explains that their powers on Earth would be greater than the population on that planet, and therefore they would have an edge to survive. Of course, Jor-El is shot down again, and warned that if he defy the Council, he will be placed in the Phantom Zone, where General Zod and the other villains can be seen swirling in space void. We cut tonight at Jor-El's house, where his wife Lara is questioning him on the lonely education of their child during his trip to Earth as they catalog knowledge for his training. We then cut to the Council, where it is reported that Jor-El is building a ship of some kind, and the Council orders that he be arrested. What is different in this script is that we see General Zod and his criminal buddies grinning over the events talked about in the Council as if they can see whatever is going on wherever from their confinement. Then, as security shows up to arrest Jor-El, the planet begins falling apart and baby Superman is shot into space as the planet crumbles into nothing, while the Phantom Zone still exists, and we can see the four villains inside dancing with glee over the death of their jailers. An interesting thing to note is that Mario Puzo put a note in the script here for the producers stating that Krypton sequences were long, and he knew it, but felt it was necessary to establish Superman's home so the audience could believe Superman as a character, and he cited the beginning of The Exorcist as an example. You can see the note here, and it's an interesting insight of Puzo's approach. In the spacecraft, Superbaby would grow, showing the passage of time before the ship lands on Earth, where Martha and Jonathan Kent would see the crash and walk through cornfields to investigate it. They find baby Superman about the age of 3, and the little tyke touches buttons that release futuristic seat belts, and Jonathan states it must be some kind of spaceship. Martha says that it can't be a spaceship because they are not in the Bible. Like the movie, they get back to the road and Jonathan Kent has to change a tire and the support gives way while the boy holds the truck up, forcing the adults to realize that this boy is clearly not like them. Martha states to her husband that no one must ever know. We then see a montage of young Clark Kent running faster than the other kids at age 12, playing basketball when he is older, and when he is 16, he is making a touchdown. Then we see Clark entering the athletic director's office at his school, where coaches are disappointed that Clark is refusing to try out for sports during his later school years. They argue that he can be an All-American, and he needs to have pride in their school. He tells them he is not interested in sports anymore, and they ask him, doesn't he want to be a professional or help the high school become national champions? Clark says no. Then we see Clark in a barn with a spaceship. he can actually fit inside the craft where he is comfortable and talking to a projection of his parents. He tells them he doesn't know what to do with himself. Sports is too easy, and it's not fair to be better than the humans he is competing against. His parents tell him it is good that he not compete against humans and that he should disguise his powers and pretend to be ordinary. They tell him to study everything from the ship's libraries, and in time we transition as he has done so. Clark, older, walks into the Kents, who are watching television. He tells both Jonathan and Martha that he must leave them, and they understand. As he leaves, Jonathan Kent talks to Clark about his powers and reminds him that man needs forgiveness more than punishment, and he also requires mercy more than justice. Clark states that it's funny because his father, Jor-El, told him the same thing while he studied the memory banks of his ship. Clark then drives away in an automobile with a trailer attached, heading north. In ice-covered fields, Clark's trailer and truck park. He enters the trailer where Kryptonian memory banks are stored, and Jor-El is on the screen stating that the most isolated place on Earth is near the Arctic, and it's there he should build a fortress with instructions. This place will be for his safety if he ever needs isolation. Clark then flies, carrying the truck and trailer to a secluded place where he builds the fortress. We also see him building computers in the fortress. Then Superman finds a polar bear, and they charge each other. Then we cut to see a polar bear rug in the Fortress of Solitude, and a fireplace roaring in the background of the crystal and electronic atmosphere. Then Superman hunts elk and other things, making furniture out of animal hides and various other material. The montage continues where Superman is shown in his superhero outfit, studying human history, science, biology, and other various things while blizzards bury the fortress. The next season, as the snows recede, Superman pulls the costume of Clark Kent out of his bedroom, and he leaves the fortress, ready to start his new life. In Metropolis, Clark is walking down the street when two taxis crash into each other and hit Clark. The drivers jump out thinking they killed him, but Clark rises from the ground casually, pushing a car off his foot and remarks, "Sorry, fellows." While everyone stares at Clark in amazement, he walks off. During Clark's commute, he walks by homeless beggars who ask for $1 so they can get a cup of coffee. Clark gives them $10 and says, "Wouldn't you like something to eat with that coffee?" The greedy panhandlers try to jump Clark for the rest of his money, but they are casually thrown off him, and Clark checks his wallet, shaking his head as he cheerfully walks along, and he eventually arrives at his new job at Galaxy Communications, where he will be a coordinator for the news anchor team, alongside Jimmy Olsen, who is in charge of the van and mobile elements of broadcasting. Perry White has a significantly smaller role in this script. Instead, a character named Morgan Edge, who runs the outfit, is the pronounced boss. He calls Lois into his office while Clark is being introduced to the job, where Morgan gives Lois hell for reporting the weather differently than instructed. Morgan says he's demoting her for not reading what she was told, but Clark states that Mrs. Lane is right. There won't be snow tomorrow, and that he would bet his job on it. Lois asks her boss to wait till the next day to demote her if there is snow. He tells them to get out, and now Clark and Lois are buds because he stood up for her. Of course, Lois is right, and she doesn't lose her job. The next morning, there is a meeting about the crime rate in the city. A man named Steve Lombard holds Lois's hand and is berated for doing so during the meeting. He asks if he can hold her hand when someone other than the boss, Morgan Edge, talks, and Lois jokes, "No, I only need your hand when he talks." They then focus on Steve Lombard in the parking garage of the building, where it is discovered that he was a great quarterback during his youth and played some pro ball. He is a typical arrogant jock type that has a football in almost every scene he's in, and he's not too sharp. Lois is later revealed to have a passing fancy for Steve, but they are nothing too serious. We then meet Lex Luthor in a subterranean hideout. He is looking at a bank on his screen and notices the van with Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Steve Lombard, and Clark Kent arriving. He wants to know why that van is there and immediately tells his men to interfere with that truck. As they walk past a ton of counterfeit money, the plan is that Luthor wants to swap all the bank's money so the feds trace all false bills to the bank, thus causing the bank to be a villain and getting the managers of the bank in trouble while he gets richer. Luthor states, "Those bank officials milk the working people. They steal within the law." And when Luthor is asked why he cares, he states, "Everybody has to have values. Otherwise, how can you decide what to do with your life?" They then head to the bank disguised as bank guards. At the van with Kent and the news team, they see an armored car where Luthor and his team are bringing sacks into the bank. The news van is curious about the events, but has to turn down a traffic corner, and it's suddenly hit by another truck per Luthor's orders. Lois exits and runs to the bank, while Lombard argues with the vehicle that hit them. In the bank, Luthor and his team have switched the money, and when they leave, Lois runs up to them and tries to interrupt them. Luthor, not having it, tells his crew to throw her in the armored car with the money. As they drive away, a figure is standing in the street blocking the escape. It is Superman. A henchman asks, "What is that?" And Luthor states, "Who, not what. That's a man in a circus costume. Run him over." Of course, the truck fails to run him over, and Luthor and his goons exit the vehicle, shooting at Superman, while Luthor's girl Eve stuffs money in her blouse before running from the scene. Luthor tries to take Lois a hostage, but fails. However, when Superman grabs Luthor, two goons try to lock themselves in the truck with Lois, and Superman lifts the truck over his head, shakes it a bit like a salt shaker, then opens the door, spilling all people out of the truck. Luthor manages to escape. Back at the news office, Edge doesn't believe a word about this Superman and says that everyone is fired. Then Lombard says, "We have all of this on film." They then run the story, and it is Clark Kent who reports it live for cameras. At his lair, Luthor watches in disgust while his henchmen debate this super person as a fake, but Luthor tells them they are up against something that is a worthy adversary. He actually says, "We are going to have fun, my dear fellow evildoers. A great deal of fun." Then there is a long segment in the newsroom where Lombard and Lois mess around, establishing them as misfits. They have a rebel dynamic, which is an us versus the company kind of thing. They come off cocky and less professional, while Kent and Olsen seem to be in the middle of it in an attempt to relay some levity. Then the script turns hokey when Lois reveals she's going to dinner with Clark. Lombard, jealous, tries to sabotage the dinner by betting the dinner and $100 that Clark can't throw a football as good as he does. Of course, Clark wins by faking luck. After this event, the team then go to cover a dangerous story, but this time Clark says he's not going, and as they drive away, he smiles. The news team is looking for crime on the streets to talk about city crime on their program, and they stop the van when they see drug dealers. They start to film it when the back of the van doors open, and men with guns plan to waste them for interfering. Then Superman arrives and deals with 6 criminals that surround the van. Lois then asks for an interview on the spot, and she asks him if he's really a Superman. And he says, "You saw that bullet bouncing off my head. You saw what I did to those criminals. I'm not your average teddy bear." He then says he's doing the interview to warn criminals to get out of town because he plans to rid the streets of crime. And then he flies off before the cops arrive. Then there is a montage of Superman busting criminals, and one is the thief who climbed up the building and falls when he realizes Superman is standing sideways. Like the movie, Superman flies down and catches him. Unlike the film, the burglar, stunned, notes that Superman saved him, and his campy reply is, "But I can't save you from jail." Then Lois and Olsen are in danger at a park, and Clark runs away, feigning cowardice. Then Superman appears. Later, Lex Luthor is sleeping, and 4 Kryptonian supervillains in the Phantom Zone are communicating to him in his dreams. They tell him to use the planet Krypton against Superman, and Luthor opens his eyes. He actually sees General Zod and his henchmen, and then returns to sleep. The next morning, he knows he has to find a piece of Krypton to defeat Superman. Meanwhile, Clark Kent reports that crime has dropped in Metropolis 75%, and that the president wants to meet with the Man of Steel, hoping to help crime in other cities in the United States, while Luthor steals kryptonite from the Metropolis Museum of Natural History. Then, Lois, Clark, Olsen, and Lombard are sent to cover terrorists who are threatening to blow up oil refineries in Iran. And there is an interlude where Lois holds Clark's hand and states that she likes him very much. They go to visit the site of a famed throne that is worth a fortune, and an explosion occurs as Luthor and some of his goons show up. Lois recognizes Luthor and demands to stay, while Clark runs away in cowardice. This will be a running theme in this script, as Clark is always feigning and being called coward throughout the movie. After this, predictably, Superman would appear. Lois calls Clark a coward as he runs, while Luthor's men drag the throne out of the building. Luthor spots Lois and grabs her too, and they flee to a new area. Superman shows up, and this is when Luthor springs his trap. Luthor pulls out the kryptonite, causing Superman to become helpless. Luthor introduces himself to Lois, and she has some snarky comments. Luthor then ties the kryptonite around Superman and tells Lois he intends to hold her and Superman for ransom. At the site of the crime, Jimmy Olsen and Steve Lombard are talking to a general named Ahmed, who states they will find the criminals and return Lois and Clark to safety. Olsen doesn't trust the man and tells Lombard they should tail him. They discover that the general is in cahoots with Luthor, and the two decide to free Lois and Clark. Jimmy tells Lombard that this is no football game, and losers will be buried. Hijinks ensue, and Lois manages to get Superman's kryptonite belt off, while Jimmy and Lombard serve as a distraction while they get away. When Olsen is in danger, Superman arrives to save him as a ton of Arab villains stab at Superman. In an attempt at more campiness, Superman throws all the men away, and a dozen red fezzes fly up in the air while the group escape. Luthor also escapes, and the next morning, Lois, Lombard, and Olsen see Clark sitting in the lobby of their hotel room. They give him grief, and when they arrive to their plane, Lois explains that she has the kryptonite with her in a lead briefcase, and she plans to give it to Superman to hide. She then looks at Clark with a smirk, as if she knows he's Superman. By now, we are on page 111 of an over 220-page script, so we're going to have to finish this script in the beginning of our next video, and then we have another script to look at. As you can see, the Superman series is going to be a bit long, because there's a lot of behind-the-scenes information to cover. And if you ever find yourself reading so much or studying so much that you have to tape your eyes open and you're losing your mind, I understand. Because there was over 1,000 pages of material we had to sift through for this series, whether it's script, articles, books, interviews, and so on. We hope you enjoy what's coming up.
The pages of my radar.
We will see you next time. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, but so does sharing.